The wind howled through the Colorado mountains like a wounded beast, biting against the stone walls of the Vance estate. The mansion stood lonely and tall, wrapped in snow and silence, just as its owner preferred. Alexander Vance hadn't spoken to a woman in 5 years, by choice. He had everything the world could offer: wealth, power, a name that made Wall Street tremble. But what he lost could never be replaced. Love had left him shattered. 5 winters ago, his fiancée, Elena, died in a car crash just weeks before their wedding. Since then, Alexander turned inward. He sold half his companies, dismissed every woman from his staff, and surrounded himself only with silence and snow. He became a ghost the world whispered about, a billionaire in exile, untouched by time or tenderness. Then came the night a stranger knocked at his door. Evelyn Carter had been driving for hours, trying to escape her own heartbreak. A week before her wedding, she found her fiancé in bed with her maid of honor. Betrayed, humiliated, and unsure where else to go, she drove toward the mountains, desperate to outrun her pain. But the storm was faster. Her car skidded off the road and slammed into a tree. The battery died. Her phone had no signal. Snow fell harder. And in the distance, through thick pines and fear, she saw a flickering light, a mansion like a mirage in the storm. She stumbled through knee-deep snow and pounded on the front door with frozen hands. The butler, an old man named Harris, stared in shock. "A woman," he muttered under his breath, almost dropping the lantern in his hand. Behind him, Alexander appeared, still and silent, wrapped in a dark coat, his face unreadable. Their eyes met. Hers were full of frost and fury. His were full of ghosts. "Let her in," he said quietly. Evelyn barely remembered being brought inside. Warm blankets, a crackling fire, hot soup pressed into her hands. She thought she'd dreamed it all, until she opened her eyes the next morning and realized she was still there. She had no idea she had just stepped into the heart of a man who hadn't let love, or even a woman, near him in half a decade. She planned to leave at first light, but nature had other plans. The roads were closed, the snow kept falling, and she was trapped. Days passed. Evelyn wandered through endless halls, antique rooms, forgotten ballrooms covered in dust. And Alexander watched her. From balconies, from doorways, always in silence. She didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. And that's what intrigued him most. She sang while cleaning up her dishes. She read aloud to herself in the library. She cried once in the hallway, quietly, when she thought no one was watching. But he saw her, just as she was. Not a guest, not an intruder, but a mirror. Of pain, of loneliness, of unspoken need. Then, on the 7th night, she found the piano. It sat in the center of a forgotten music room, covered in sheets. She lifted the cover, brushed off the dust, and began to play. A soft, broken tune. The same melody Elena used to play when she couldn't sleep. Alexander stood in the doorway, frozen. She turned when she saw him, startled. "Sorry, I didn't mean." "Play it again," he whispered. She did. And when the final note echoed off the walls, Alexander closed his eyes, for the first time in years, and breathed. The days blurred. They shared breakfasts, walked the snowy gardens. She asked about the art on his walls, and he listened when she spoke about her childhood in Brooklyn. He started smiling. Once, he even laughed. The house that once echoed with grief began to breathe again. But pain still lived in both of them. Evelyn couldn't understand why he kept his distance, why he flinched when her fingers brushed his. And Alexander feared that if he touched her, if he let her too close, he'd lose her too. Like all the things he once loved. Still, something was shifting. One morning, Evelyn woke to find a vase of fresh lavender by her bedside. She hadn't seen flowers in days. That evening, Alexander placed a book on her plate at dinner, one she'd mentioned offhandedly 3 nights before. Little things. They weren't love yet, but they were close. The storm outside had begun to ease, but inside the mansion, something deeper stirred. Evelyn and Alexander continued to orbit one another like two lost stars, drawn together by gravity neither of them understood yet feared to trust. Evelyn had never met a man like him before, so powerful, yet so wounded. Every time she caught him gazing at her, he quickly turned away, like the warmth in her eyes burned the grief he refused to bury. She wanted to ask him why he shut himself off, but something in his silence made her pause. Instead, she let time do the talking. One afternoon, as she painted quietly by the window, Alexander entered without a word and sat across from her. He placed an old photo album on the table. "This," he said, "was my life before everything changed." Inside were pictures of a younger Alexander, smiling, full of light, with a woman beside him in every frame. Elena, the woman he was meant to marry. "I swore I'd never feel again after she died," he confessed. "So I buried myself here. And for 5 years, I didn't let anyone in. Especially women. I couldn't." Evelyn listened, her hands folded in her lap. "Then why me?" He looked up, eyes searching hers. "Because you didn't ask to come. But you stayed." The weeks grew warmer. Evelyn found herself laughing again, genuinely. Alexander began to open doors long sealed shut, literally and emotionally. He even allowed her to help him rebuild the greenhouse Elena had once designed. There, among blooming tulips and thawing earth, they began to bloom, too. But healing doesn't come without shadows. One evening, a guest arrived unexpectedly. Richard Malden, an old friend of Alexander's and a powerful businessman, landed via helicopter to check in on his long-lost friend. Evelyn answered the door, and Richard mistook her for a maid. "Pretty for a servant," he said with a smirk. Alexander saw the interaction and said nothing. But later, he watched Evelyn across the dinner table, laughing politely at Richard's jokes. Something twisted inside him. Jealousy, sharp and unfamiliar. That night, he didn't speak to her. The next morning, he didn't come to breakfast. Days passed, and his distance returned like a wall slamming shut. Evelyn felt it instantly. She knocked on his study door, but was met with silence. Slipped notes under it. Nothing. Finally, after a week of avoidance, she confronted him in the garden. "What happened to you?" she demanded. "You let me in. You started to live again. Then you ran." Alexander stood by the fountain, gripping its icy edge. "You're leaving soon. The roads are clear. And when you go, I can't. I won't survive another loss." Evelyn stepped closer. "So you're pushing me away to save yourself?" He turned sharply. "I lost the love of my life, Evelyn. I don't get to love again." Tears stung her eyes. "And I lost everything I believed in. But I'm still here. With you. Doesn't that mean something?" He didn't answer. So she packed. That night, she placed her bag near the front door and left a note on the piano. "Thank you for letting me feel again. Even if only for a while." She didn't sleep. Just sat on the edge of the guest bed, heart heavy. She was ready to leave. Until dawn came, and with it, the sound of music. The piano. Not played by her, but by him. She ran to the music room and found him there, hands trembling over the keys, tears streaming down his face. "I haven't seen a woman in 5 years," he said, not looking up. "Not because I couldn't. Because I wouldn't allow myself to hope." He finally met her eyes. "But then you came. And I see you. I see everything I thought I lost." He stood. "I'm not asking you to stay because I'm broken. I'm asking you to stay because you make me want to be whole." And just like that, he kissed her. Not out of need, but out of surrender. The kiss lingered in the air like the final note of a song that refused to end. Alexander's lips trembled as he pulled away, as if realizing how fragile hope could feel after years of burying it. Evelyn stood still, her heart pounding, not from shock, but from recognition. For the first time since she'd arrived at the mansion, she saw not the billionaire, not the recluse, but the man beneath the storm. "Do you mean it?" she whispered. "I do," he said. "But not just that. I want to give you more. Not just a kiss. Not just a moment. Everything." The next few days passed in a haze of quiet joy. Alexander opened up fully, like spring breaking through winter. He showed her the studio where he used to paint with Elena. They dusted off the easels together and painted new memories on top of old ones. Evelyn helped him replant the roses in the garden, each bloom a promise of what was yet to come. And then came the night he brought her to the ballroom. It hadn't been used in years. Chandeliers hung like crystal ghosts above, and the air still carried echoes of laughter and music long gone. He had it cleaned, polished, revived. Just for her. Candles flickered around them. A string quartet played softly in the background. She stood in the center of the room in a simple white dress he'd left for her on the bed, confused but curious. "What is this?" she asked as he approached, dressed in black velvet and wearing a look that melted every scar he'd once tried to hide. He smiled softly. "A wedding, if you'll have me." Tears filled her eyes instantly. "But there's no one here. There's me, and you, and that's enough. No guests,